Dr. Phil, Superman, man in his
Superman.
new... Superman, yeah, Henry Cavill. You're our Henry Cavill lookalike. I've got to bring that up, otherwise what's the point in having a Henry Cavill lookalike? Riddle me this, Phil. Riddle me this. Anyway, I like your new setup.
He got dropped, didn't he? Do you like it?
I do, yeah.
Absolutely
No,
love this.
is it away from the house?
Corner. Yeah, house is over there, and literally at the back end of the garden. Set up this log cabin for research, work, recording, everything. So,
do you feel as an academic that you can focus a lot more with that setting, with that separation?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, before I was in one of the rooms, and when you've got young kids, it's difficult to fully concentrate because, yeah, you want to go down and play.
That's actually a topic I'd love to discuss at a separate point, is how you manage maintaining focus on the thing that you are trying to research amidst other things. Because, I mean, yeah, singularity of focus is great, but when you look at email notifications, when Johan Hari's Stolen Focus book, good example of how often we are distracted. I'd love to know how you are in the business, effectively, of being focused on a singular task for an extended period of time. So you'd have some great insights. That's for another time. We'll stay focused, because today we're going to talk about how to optimize double training days, which... And I don't mean this in any sort of derogatory way, Phil, but I feel like you haven't done as many of recently on account of those young children that you mentioned.
No, literally, I can't remember the last time I did a double training day.
But you've done plenty in the past, haven't you?
I've done plenty in the past before kids, but now, if we talk about consolidating training, like there's consolidating training for hybrid training, and then there's consolidating training where you've got a minimal amount of time to try and get the most output.
Do you think you've been forced to figure that out for yourself just by virtue of being in that situation? So we'll get a bit more specific in a second, but your own training, obviously very competent at many things in the past. You had all the research and the understanding in terms of how to implement it and why to implement it. But do you feel that you really actually understood what that was like for you in a practical setting until you had the children? You know what I mean? It's kind of theory versus practice. Do you feel like you now understand the research in a way that you didn't before?
I mean, having kids makes you completely see the world completely differently. And you can apply that to any different aspect, whether it be training, life, whatever it be. And I can only imagine for the better. I guess when you have kids, your ability to recover is different. So when you're trying to make a decision between, lumping training together in a small part of the day versus trying to spread it out, and the logistical and the fatigue cost that comes with that, yeah, it's definitely made me rethink. Because before it was just, well, surely if you want to make sure that you're trying to optimize both sessions, surely you would separate them. But now when you start to balance it with a load of other stuff, you're like, okay, you've got to take a more pragmatic approach with this. And it's definitely made me think about that in more depth with other people, because everyone has lots of life admin, and I don't think I'd be as quick to separate sessions unless they were at a particular level. It definitely made me rethink that.
Okay, so on that, quickly, let's lay out a couple of things for context for those listening before we dive into some of the details, because I think what you've just said is important, i.e. this is not going to be a podcast discussion on optimization for the sake of optimization. This is going to be a discussion on how do you actually practically, I'm going to say it again because this is going to be the word used most frequently in this conversation, practically execute double training days. And the answer might actually be don't do them, which is something we'll circle back to at the end. So we want this discussion that's about to happen to be for those that don't have children, do have children, have flexible jobs, don't have flexible jobs. We want this to be about the theory and then the lived practice that we've been through, so that people can take the sort of things that apply to them and ignore the things that don't, per se. So, in simple terms, what are the overarching points to consider from a strength and conditioning point of view when balancing double training days, and why would there be a need for them in the first place?
I think the main thing to focus on first would be how fresh you need to be going into that session. That's really, really important, because freshness will then help with the intent of training. And if you need to put full effort into training to get the desired adaptation coming from it, then you need some form of rest beforehand to make sure that you're getting the most out of that session. So if that is you, then that's the first thing that I would start thinking about, separating the sessions. After that, I'd start thinking about a bit more of like, oh, well, what needs to come before it apart from recovery? Because there's lots of things to recovery. You know, if you're working full time and your recovery is a full day of work, that's not really recovery, is it? It's a lot of other things. But, you know, some people have certain lifestyles. Well, what's in between the two sessions will enable you to maintain that freshness to ensure that you can do that separate session with full intent. If the splitting of sessions creates, I don't know, like a logistical headache, or the setup is actually quite taxing, and that could be like going to some place and setting things up and going to re-warm up, all of those types of things, then you start thinking, actually, is this worth it? You know, you've separated two sessions to try and ensure freshness of that second session, but actually it creates such a headache during the day that really, even if I combine the two sessions and you'd think maybe I wasn't going into that second session as fresh, would the logistical side actually, logistical ease with that, the feasibility, actually reduce this kind of overarching fatigue with that, which then makes you think that actually combining the two would be more beneficial. So I've come at that from like a fatigue freshness perspective, not even going into the nitty gritty of, you know, what is fatigue, the different types of fatigue, the differences between, or, you know, mTOR and AMPK and all those types of things, which we kind of mentioned beforehand. Like, I've come straight from a practical sense and understanding the fatigue that general life can actually, and work life admin can actually cause as well. So ultimately, that second session, how fresh do you need to be for that? And that will depend on lifestyle, the level of the athlete, a number of different things. And those are probably the things that I go to first when deciding whether to split it or keep the sessions together.
So here's a question for you. As a PhD holder in this space, someone that is far more intelligent than I, or probably, you know,
good at faking it, to be honest.
In an academic setting, you win every time and probably win in most settings when it comes to research in the world of hypertraining. Do you therefore think that practicality is actually more important than the granularity of what a lot of research aims to discover? Separate professional setting for a recreational athlete, somebody that does not optimize their day-to-day existence for the output of a performance in their sport. Is practicality the singular most important thing?
Yeah, I'd argue that, certainly. And I think the research kind of supports that. If you're talking about the everyday athlete, you're looking at a recreationally active person or someone that trains, I guess, regularly. And they're the type of people that quite often get involved with research studies because they're readily available, especially if you're doing research at a university. You've got not professional sports people, but people that are active and do training. So it feels like the research already supports that, because if we think about it from a interference effect, quite a lot of the time, if the training is managed very, very well, there isn't any interference effect at all. So it feels like for the everyday person, yeah, I think the research supports that. I think more and more people now are moving into that threshold of being a pretty decent athlete / almost like a professional athlete, because social media has opened up an avenue to become a professional athlete without actually, you know, being a professional athlete, like being part of a team or part of a governing body, for example. So we are getting more and more people that are stepping over that threshold to being considered very, very good. And I don't think we have that much research for that population. And I think the research could really benefit that population because they are pushing the boundary. But if you're an everyday athlete, yeah, I think the research supports that. And practicality is the first thing I'm going to go to. You know, they say you've got to be consistent. If you can't be consistent, the training program isn't appropriate. And whether that's setting up the week or setting up the day, yeah, consistency is key. If you can't be consistent, then you can't really apply all those key things that we know from the research.
Agreed. So on that, we're basically managing systemic fatigue versus localized fatigue. here. That's kind of what we're doing in a general sense from a double training day point of view. And look, from my point of view, I think, when does an athlete need to implement double training days? The answer is not because it looks cool on social media or because you have an incessant desire to always be doing more out of fear or inadequacy that you're going to fall behind, which I think is what a lot of the reasons that people do it these days is primarily for. So everything, in my opinion, should work backwards from what is your primary outcome goal, and then build the blocks towards that logically and rationally so that you can get there sustainably and consistently, with practicality being the overarching principle that packages it all together. Doing more for the sake of more isn't always the best outcome, especially when balancing training disciplines concurrently. And to be able to adapt and recover and move forwards concurrently, you need to have adequate recovery in there. And recovery is not necessarily things like localized red light therapy. It is the ability to do the work, give enough time for the adaptation to occur, get enough sleep, eat well enough, and then beyond that we can start adding on the grains of sand on top of all of that stuff. That's if I'm being superficial and flippant, that's where I'll sort of draw that line. So systemic versus localized fatigue. Essentially, in a double training day, you are looking to, as you said, balance freshness versus output. So you need to ask yourself, okay, well, why am I doing session A on the same day as session B? Are those at conflict with one another? Is one going to massively impact the other, or is one going to massively not impact the other? But it should all be working backwards from the question of, do I need to be doing this in the first place? I think double training session days become relevant when someone cannot logically or practically accumulate the volume required for their goal in a 7-day cycle, and they need to start adding in more. Or if things like, look, let's say you want to protect Sunday for a day with your family. If you're taking on a big training goal, that's a big family commitment. And to get the whole family unit on side, there's going to have to be sacrifice and compromise from one direction to the other. It's a very logical thing to do, to say, right, on Sundays, I'm going to protect them and I'm not going to train on that day. That's going to be a day where I allocate to my kids, to my family, to life admin, whatever it might be. And that might mean that you're then working on a 6-day training window. So you might need to take Tuesdays as a double run day to accumulate the volume that you need to hit to be able to get to the end goal, for example. So practicality wins in every situation, but I don't think everybody should be aspiring to do double training days unless there is a need. Hybrid training requires training across disciplines, which means that you are trying to do more training across more things in a tighter window, which means it's more likely that you will get to a point sooner where you require a double training day, but it does not necessarily need that you have to. Double training days are not an essential component of making progress in strength and or endurance training concurrently, I don't believe. However, they can be a useful tool once somebody has accumulated enough volume in both disciplines to be able to manage that load. So as systemic fatigue builds, you're going to get more and more fatigued with the work done over time, and that's going to put you more at risk of sort of hitting a point where you overspill your NRV. Localized fatigue is more what we're considering on a day-to-day basis when it comes to double training days. In that, if you do a session in the morning that massively compromises your lower body, and then you go into a session in the evening that's meant to massively recruit your lower body, then you need to be careful about how you put those sessions together. Otherwise, you're essentially going into one compromised in a way that you hadn't accounted for. Key detail, on paper. A lot of programming is done on paper, not in reality. And that reality, as we've already discussed, for a lot of people, is kids, family, work, goals that might be a little bit intimidating. Their boss keeping them back for a couple of hours at work, meaning that they can't get to the gym on time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So from a research point of view, when it comes to managing that localized fatigue on a day-to-day basis, if somebody has hit the threshold where they require double training days, what are the key things they should consider?
As in what to do to try and enhance their freshness between the two sessions?
Or to mitigate against the compromising effect?
Yeah. So first of all, you're trying to replenish what you lost during that first session. So regardless of what that first session is, you would have used some form of substrates and water to try and perform in that first session. So we need to make sure that we rehydrate, get some form of protein in our cells and carbohydrate as well to try and replenish muscle glycogen. In terms of protein, leucine is a very good option, but leucine is quite prominent in a lot of good protein sources. So as long as you are recovering in those sense, that's really good. On top of that, and I think this is something that people don't think of that much. People often think of recovering as like not training, and that's not true at all. I'd be very key on what I do during those. Let's say you split my 6 hours. I'll be very key on what I want to do during that time, because I don't want to be doing something or viewing something that's going to wind me up, make me feel stressed or anything like that, because then that builds up additional stress and fatigue, which then impacts the second session. There's plenty of research now which is starting to show that people that do a lot of doom scrolling or have viewed something which is quite taxing on their body, like they're taking in lots and lots of information, they then perceive the training session after that as harder. So you might want to avoid the phone. You might want to do whatever it might be to try and minimize and relax as much as possible. This is going to be very difficult for people who are at work. But if you are someone that has a great setup where you're able to try and maybe you work at a gym and you have a few clients during the day, and either side of that you can get some training in with the double session days. That's absolutely great. But I wouldn't be doing anything that would try and agitate that. So it isn't just what you do and consume, it's what you view. There's a variety of different things that can actually impact that second session.
I'm trying to get up in the background here a presentation I did recently where I created a hierarchy of, I think I called it the hierarchy of idealness, which is obviously is a terrible use of the English language, but it was me trying to be mildly humorous. Where I've ranked things from most ideal to least ideal, but caveating the fact that all of these are better than not doing the training in the first place. Mm-hmm. And I would like you to rate my ranking. I'd like you to rank my ranking, please, Phil, if you don't mind.
We need to do one of those YouTube videos, which we should in S tier, A tier, all that.
Good idea, Phil. There we go. We'll film some reels after this and get all the ranky on stuff. We'll become rank, so to speak. We achieved that years ago. Never mind. Anyway, base of the pyramid is most ideal. Top of the pyramid is least ideal. I'm going to work from the bottom upwards. And yeah, context-wise, all of these are better than not doing the training in the first place or letting a practicality and convenience force you to rip up the training program and start all over again. The Redditor clause, as I like to call it. Mm-hmm. So, most ideal, number one, is whatever is most practical for you. I think we've already agreed on that one, so I'm feeling pretty confident so far. If we're talking, I've used this this was lifting and triathlon related. So I've got examples here, but we'll go with it. So the next building block, the next set of stones moved by thousands of Egyptians is lifting first, triathlon training second, with more than a 6-hour gap in between. Next on the ladder is, or the pyramid rather, I should keep my shapes correct, is lifting first, triathlon second, with less than a 6-hour gap. Next, triathlon first, lifting second, with more than a 6-hour gap. And then the least ideal is triathlon training first, lifting second, with less than a 6-hour gap. And obviously you can go a little bit higher, going sort of immediately afterwards or something. But effectively, all of those will give you most of the stimulus that you're looking to achieve with the session as intention. You have to acknowledge a little bit the compromise in terms of what you haven't replenished in those gaps. But would you agree that in every single one of those examples, unless being done repeatedly, suboptimally, over and over again, where you'd have to readdress the training program as a whole, in a double training day setting, or a 2-session day setting, even if those end up being spliced together, that is the order in which you would put them.
So just so I can remember, you had practical, strength first, and then triathlon first, then triathlon first.
Correct.
I do want. The more and more I think about it, sometimes because the research really does support doing your strength training first if you did do 2 sessions in one go, on the same day, whether you split them all together. I think if you're splitting them, I think you can get away with a little bit more having the triathlon training first, depending on your sport. So as like strength and powerlifting, if you did an upper body session that evening, I don't think you could probably get away with it a little bit more if triathlon training was first.
Whereas going from a over-under 1.5 hour turbo trainer session to a 3RM deadlift would be interesting, to say the least.
Would be interesting, and yeah, certainly. Because again, if 3RM deadlift, you're going for a max, whether it's 1RM or 3RM, you're trying to go near your limit, aren't you? So it requires a lot of freshness. If it was a session which was, you're kind of working around that 70-80% mark, roughly, you might be able to get away with it a little bit more, but the issue you have sometimes is that you could get away with it, but if you did it over and over again over a long period of time, that's when you might not. And we don't really know where that threshold goes from, like, you're getting away with it to, like, you're not.
Because that's one of those intangible metrics,
people.
Isn't it? It's not something we've got wearable technology to tell us on, oh, you've cooked it here today, buddy. Let's call it. Let's not do this again. Let's not do this again.
I wonder if your pyramid is like...
It's what is it? It's a
chopper.
It's like a conical, inverted conical flask.
Yeah.
It's okay. Well, thank you for the critique of my shape.
It's cool, and it really highlights something, because when it comes to deciding whether to do a double session day, like, your strength in triathlon is really geared towards, like, you need to do double training session days, because sometimes you're in the swimming pool, sometimes you're out. Whereas if you just did strength and running, you could probably combine them a bit more together, purely from a practical sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think that is the key. Is the difference with triathlon, though, is it's quite skill heavy in many ways, where until you get to a certain level, you won't accumulate a huge amount of fatigue in the pool. You'll accumulate a little bit of localized fatigue, but I'm confident that you can replenish that a lot quicker than you could a hard turbo session, for example, because it's primarily technique dominant. Even the bike, it's low impact, it's low transient impact load, so essentially you are not accumulating as much muscular fatigue around the joint as you would with running, which is you're gonna feel a lot more when it comes to sinking into the bottom position of a squat, for example, or any sort of dynamic movements, anything like that. I think the absolute key is the reason we use the RPE scale in most of our programming rather than specific percentage work for strength training is to allow for the flexibility when what was ideal is overruled by what is practical. So let's use that example of a hard effort turbo over under session into a 3RM deadlift. If you view the 3RM deadlift as, you know that your 1RM is 220 kilos, so you expect your 3RM to be about 205. But you go into it having just done a turbo session, you've had a banana, you've showered, and now you're in the gym. It would not be unreasonable to expect that a 3RM deadlift on that day at the same RPE would be 190 or 195. And whilst we don't recommend doing that, if that is the only thing that you can do within the context of the day because of timing, whatever it might be, you are still giving the most that you had available on the day, which I think is a core component of Westside Barbell's methodology in terms of powerlifting over the years. It was always variation work to an RPE scale so that you are utilizing the freshness that you have available on the day, because it's intangible, for the best outcome that you can in that variation on that day. And by targeting your weak points with those variations, you are getting a stimulus that is making your weak point stronger, therefore making your overall position stronger even when fatigued. And I think there's a lot of elements that you can actually take from Westside and conjugate style programming with utilizing the RP scale for this approach, because hybrid training is already a compromise. Double training days are then a secondary compromise. And the third compromise is that 99% of people listening to this, ourselves included, are managing training on top of other commitments. That we're not optimizing, we are not measured on the performance outcome that we have. And I think that's the key, is unless you can optimize your life to prioritize that specific outcome, you're always going to have to bend every once in a while. You're always going to have a day where you go, right, okay, I did plan my lifting at this time in the morning, I did plan this later on, but I now need to reshuffle. Do I play catch up? Do I consolidate these sessions into one? Do I reduce my volume? And I think part of the skill of hybrid training is learning in your own body through iteration what you respond well to, what you don't respond well to, when practicality doesn't go your way. And I think there are a few rules that we can generally give, which we will do now, for double training days in general terms, based on the research and the experience and sort of the athletes that we've worked with. But I think practicality wins every single time. And that's where things like the RPE scale, heart rate, that are variable based on the levels of fatigue that we're dealing with and levels of freshness that we're dealing with, allow for you to be a little bit more flexible on your expectations or the metrics that you're looking for when you're not working in the most ideal setting. So I'll kick things off. A classic game of podcast tennis, Phil, you'll be pleased to hear. So number one, we've already mentioned it, so I'll steal it, sorry, is if you can, try and leave 6 hours or more between your training sessions, as a rule.
Yeah. It's a good rule of thumb. Interestingly, there's only actually been one study which has actually used that. And I did that in one of my OMNIA performance lectures. It was like trying to explain it. I was like, well, there's actually only one study. So need a bit more here. But it is very much a rule of thumb. The 6 hour thing is just because that's what they did. But it makes sense from a practical sense.
Right. Return serve, please, Phil.
As in?
Another rule, please.
Little rule. Ensure you have rich protein and carbohydrate foods between sessions. It might sound obvious, but you'd be surprised.
Quality of nutrition as well plays a big part once you're doing double training days.
Yeah.
Okay, Fergus, to return. Plan diligently, not optimistically. Pool opening times. Pool, kid, super fun splash time, inflatable, let's go times. Leisure centres aren't known for being the most forgiving in terms of their opening times. Tracks aren't known for being the most forgiving. Is your bike on the turbo? Do you have a cassette on your turbo? Are your cleats able to clip into your bike after your long ride at the weekend? Plan the double training days in advance, because you're already packing a lot into one day. You don't want to try and have to pack in more by having to fix something that you could have fixed ahead of time, especially when you're dealing with opening times. Again, if we take lifting and running, gyms, generally speaking, are fixed opening times, not a timetable, and running you can do outdoors. As soon as you start adding in maybe more specialist lifting, like powerlifting or ollie lifting, you might be working in constrained opening times. You might have travel from place to place. You might have food challenges between place to place if you're picking stuff up on the way. So plan diligently, not optimistically, when it comes to executing double training days, because you can very easily catch yourself out and nothing will derail a double training day quicker than something going wrong. And it will if you let it. Should we try and make a tennis sound?
You've got to finish it with a grunt.
Yeah, what's the Wii? The Wii. You have you still got a Wii? Or was it the PS? Have you still got a PS1 or a PS2?
No, I've got an N64 in the back here.
An N64. Wow, that was a Wii. A Wii seems like a bloody modern piece of kit now in comparison.
Greatest console ever.
Yeah, that's a very good bit of kit, and it's bought us some time for you to think of another rule. So there we go.
My next rule would be around if you needed to do 2 intense sessions on the same day, your overall acute fatigue from that day will therefore be high. Just make sure that you've planned the rest of the week so that you've got part of the week where acute fatigue is going to be high and the rest of the week acute fatigue is going to be relatively low. Where people make mistakes is that acute fatigue just is maintained and spread out across the week, and that's where people they're very singular into like double session days. This is what I've got to do today, whereas they don't take it as like the week as a whole, as a month as a whole. You know, when are you pushing, when are you not? Because when you're pushing, acute fatigue is going to be quite high, and that's fine because that could really derive some great adaptation, but it's also not sustainable. So plan accordingly.
That is the exact reason, from a methodological point of view, with Omnia, why we consolidate stresses at the start of the week into intensity grouping, and then we sort of have intensity peak at the start of the week and volume peak at the end of the week, and invert them as the week goes along. Acute fatigue is high at the start and decreases as the week goes on, and vice versa. And that's the way that we found most effectively balances exactly what you've just described. So a great point, Phil. Thank you. That wasn't even set up to reinforce the methodology. So
that was low over the net, wasn't it? That was a flat hit.
That was a let. Yep, let. Good. And here I am scrambling to get to it. And where possible, lift first. But if you can't lift first for practical reasons, because it's incredibly hot where you live. This is something I've become more forgiving of over the years because I've experienced it. If the temperature gets stupid once you get past 7 a.m. and it therefore makes sense for you to lift later in the evening once it cools down a little bit. Sorry, once it's hot and you can be indoors with air conditioning on and you need to be at the track first thing, for example. Again, practicality wins. But from a theoretical point of view, where possible, lift first within the context of a double training day. Nice.
Take into account that if you do a double training day, that if you train in the morning and the late afternoon, evening, you've only got a certain amount of time between the late evening and the morning session on the next day to recover. Sometimes combining the two sessions into the morning means you've got another full 24 hours to recover before your next session the following day or even the next evening. Use that wisely when trying to program for recovery during the week, because that could be really quite helpful, especially if you've got 1 or 2 days that are really intense at the beginning of the week.
Excellent point. And actually, I'm gonna say that rain stops play. Umpires taking the players off the pitch, and I'm going to just develop that point quickly before we close things off for the day, which is...
You're putting the roof on, aren't you?
I'm putting the roof on. Yeah, I'm putting the roof on our game of tennis, mainly to stop our terrible sound effects. We probably could have just fixed that in post-production, just get the Wii tennis sound. I can't even think what the Wii tennis sound is, but I know there is one. I'm going to look that up straight after this. And so much so, I've actually lost track of thought as to what your last point was. It was about maximising recovery within 24-hour... So, yes. So, key summary at this point is that clearly, hopefully, we've demonstrated there is no one-size-fits-all approach to this. It is a set of principles fits all approach to your individual circumstances. And that's the key. I think far too often we get lost in trying to mimic directly what other people do because it works for them, rather than taking from what works for them and applying it to our own set of circumstances. So within that context, I know that you training-wise in the past, you've done sessions together. So essentially, if there's 2 sessions in a day, 2 sessions within the context of a day, do you generally think if it's possible for someone, if they've got the time allocation, let's say 2 to 3 hours allocated first thing in the morning, the overall, I guess, allocation of time, stress, mental energy that goes into day-to-day, typical, normal, conventional sort of lives and structures, if someone can lift, as long as the programming's sensible, obviously, lift followed by their endurance training in the same session, or let's say a 1 hour, 15-minute gap, 1 hour, there is any sort of interference effect that people need to worry about in the grand scheme of things. Because we get this question a lot. We get people that get up first thing in the morning and like to do both their sessions, and they've got their evenings to themselves, and that might be evenings with the family, that might be evenings to focus on more recovery and unwinding. I know how much freer and in control I feel when I don't have another session to do in the evening versus when it's all boxed off by midday. So given your experience and the sort of research overarching point of view, if somebody feels like there's massive personal benefit to having their evenings back, do you think that, in terms of sustainability and consistency, outweighs the potential for an interference effect at a recreational training level that would come from doing them both in the morning?
Yes. I wanted to answer quite quickly there.
No.
Because, I do. Because I think that programming strategies which help the person leave a better life, and that's more manageable, have such a positive impact on that person's training that it's really hard to measure, but I think it's really quite important. Certainly as I've got older, if I'm in the gym, I want to get everything that I need to get done, because I want the rest of the day off, because usually when the older you get, the more things you've got to balance. Like I don't need that additional mental stress, just thinking. In terms of an interference effect,
or slight caveat, a further inhibiting of progress in terms of the maximization of the work that you're doing for the adaptation gained.
That's probably a better way of putting it, actually, because I think people jump on an interference effect and you think it's actually one thing, but really you could argue that that second session, which is 50 minutes later, might be, you're not training as intent just because you're a little bit tired, and it's that lack of intensity that may have the less desired effect. However, I think people are overestimating what that lack of intensity is, because if you know that you're going to get it done and you're going to try and train as hard as possible and you like training in the morning, you're going to train pretty intently. So that's pretty key. In terms of, say, fatigue/molecular, will there be an interference effect? The greater the intensity and the volume of those sessions, maybe a little bit. It will depend on the athlete. If they're an everyday athlete, I'd say probably minimal to a little bit. I still think that you would be hard to notice an interference effect anyway, because you're still improving. Say the interference effect is like it knocks off 20% of what you could have gained.
Yep.
You're still going to gain quite a lot. That's 80%. And you don't even know what 100% is because you haven't felt it or experienced it. So all you know is that you've got better, and probably got better really well, especially if the rest of the training is programmed correctly. If you're working with, like JB or Kieran.
Yeah, so I think that was going to be that was going to be my final point. Is essentially we've been fairly non-specific in terms of exactly what this means to you, the listener, that you can immediately take away and do right now. But that's kind of the whole point, in that there's principles for you to consider and apply to your own circumstances. It is a challenge to get this balance right and to learn these skills, but that is ultimately what we're here for, to help you sort of figure that out along the way. And if you want to learn those skills to then go and figure things out for yourself moving forwards, then we're more than happy to do that. You don't need to be with us forever, and we wouldn't encourage you to be either way. So I think that's the final point there. This is the Omnia Performance Podcast, and we'd love for you to work with Omnia Performance. So thank you very much, Phil. I think there's always more that we can discuss on that topic, but as always, we've held ourselves accountable to our overarching principle, which is it depends.
We didn't even say it until then.
We didn't even say it.
Although I was actually thinking about it at one point, but I'm glad we avoided it.
Hold your tongue, Mr. Cavill. Anyway, that's that for this episode. We're about to record another one, and it's also going to be excellent. So make sure that you hit follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Thank you very much, and goodbye.